So now we want to think about, with flooding, how we can change either the flood frequency or the flood damage. Now, flooding is somewhat unique in that it's one of the few hazards that we actually have some control over. Most of the time, these other hazards we mentioned, we don't have much control over, especially natural hazards. We can't stop an earthquake from happening, we can't stop a hurricane from happening, but we can sometimes change a flood from happening. So if we think about the two components of risk, this idea of frequency and this idea of damage, and we think about how we can control one versus the other, we can think of some ways that we try and reduce the risk from flooding. So if we think about some ways that we reduce the frequency of flooding, so we might build a dam that will make floods less frequent by holding that water back behind the dam, putting it in the reservoir and letting it slowly out. Maybe we would have less impermeable surfaces, less concrete, less roads, more chances for water to infiltrate, less opportunities for water runoff and become damaging that way. Now, if we think about flood damages, now, of course, if we reduce the flood frequency, we're also going to reduce the flood damages. The one flood frequency does affect the damages, but damages don't affect the frequency typically. So if all we want to do is say, okay, the same floods are going to occur as before, but now we're going to make them less damaging. How can we do this? What are some ways in which we can try and reduce the damage, but the flood is still going to happen? Well, one of these ways is to try and buy out homes. And so we take the homes that are frequently flooded, and these are homes that have been repeatedly flooded over several years or over a decade or two. And actually, the government buys those out and then moves the people out of that neighborhood. That could be one. Another one might be to elevate the houses. So the floods will still happen, but now it just goes beneath them. And maybe on the first floor, the flooding happens, but the first floor is now just an empty garage, basically, or a concrete room or something, which is better than what typically happens. You think about what typically makes a house function. Where is the circuit breaker? Where's the hot water heater? Where's all the utilities? It's in the basement. And what's the first thing to flood? It's in the basement. And so with flooding, it's one of the few natural hazards that we have this ability to affect the frequency and the damage. Typically, natural hazards, all we can do is work on the damage aspect of risk because we can't stop an earthquake or hurricane. But with flooding, we actually can try and do some of this stuff. And so that's the difference between flood frequency and flood damages and how we can have some control over them.